Hello, I am Demon, and today I'm going to be talking about how Scott's plan from Total Drama Revenge of the Island is actually genius. Almost genius. It's not quite perfect. You'll see why. Now, some of you might be thinking, really? Scott? A genius? This is the dude that canonically ate dirt.
I'm sad, and when I'm sad, I eat dirt.
Now, in all actual seriousness, most people, or at least a lot of people I see online, think that Scott's plan in Revenge of the Island is quite dumb or stupid or is conceptually bad, and I can't help but disagree. Now, that doesn't mean I think the execution is perfect. I don't think Scott executes his idea perfectly. Still does a really good job, surprisingly, but the actual idea is really, really solid. And his plan, well, I'll just let Scott himself explain it.
All right. I was out looking for that hidden immunity idol. Not that they need to know. It's all part of my strategy. Let my team lose so the maggots develop a false sense of security before I pick them off.
So yeah, as you can see, Scott's essentially trying to sabotage his own team again and again, so by the time the merge happens, everyone will underestimate him and Scott can then go and win the $1 million. Now again, initial thoughts, that sounds dumb. Why would you intentionally want to sabotage your own team? You know, that's the whole point during that team part of the game is to win the challenges, and so you don't have any risk of getting voted off? Well, yeah. Well, here's the thing about Scott's plan. The entire point of Scott's plan is to make himself look as weak and pathetic, and basically Scott is trying to give himself sort of the underdog status, right? Or at least a facade of the underdog. So basically, during the team portion of the game, Scott is trying to, and well, we can see, yeah, Scott succeeds in sabotaging the team again and again, and eliminates B and eliminates Dawn, right? You know, Scott clearly had a plan, and he executes it quite well. However, the real plan happens once Scott merges. The idea is that Scott will be maybe one of the last few members of the Toxic Rats, maybe even the last member. And the whole idea is that the other team will get so confident that they will start, when the merge happens, since they've never had a chance to vote each other off, any conflict that's still there, and we can see that there is conflict, Zoe and Anne-Maria, Joe and Brick, you know, these conflicts will pretty much be in full force, and they will try and vote each other off. And, who's the swing vote who can determine the outcome? Well, it's going to be Scott. All the mutant maggots will go to him and be like, hey, help me out, you know. And Scott can basically then be the deciding vote throughout the merge, all the way up until, you know, he gets in the final two, you know, and that's pretty good, right? Now, of course, there are some risks, right? You know, if you get caught sabotaging your team, you're out of there. And Scott is fully aware of this, so he is constantly trying to blame stuff on other people. He blames B for sabotage. He tries to blame Brick for stealing stuff, but then once Dawn catches on to Scott's plan, Scott immediately frames Dawn. And yeah, we can see, yeah, if Scott gets caught at any point, it's kind of gone. So there is a lot of risk to the plan. And of course, another thing with the merge, in the off chance that the mutant maggots did work really well together, it's kind of a bit rough for you. Or if you don't quite vote right in the merge, you might have a situation where it's like you've got Zoe and Cameron working against you in like the final three, so you got to be a little bit you've got to be careful there once you get really close to the end. But basically, if you can get to the merge successfully, you know, you sabotage your team, you get to the merge successfully, you don't get caught, everyone underestimates you, the other team is fighting against each other, you would basically have an immense amount of control and power throughout the majority of the merge, up until maybe about the final 3 or so. You've got a lot of control on, because you're gonna be the swing vote. And that's what makes Scott's plan almost genius. Now, when it comes to the execution of this plan, well, Scott admittedly is not perfect at this. I mean, Scott doesn't win Revenge of the Island, so clearly his plan goes wrong at some point, and I know exactly where his plan goes wrong, but I'll get to that when I get to that, right? First, we'll go through episode 3, when B is eliminated. This is where Scott really starts with his plan. His team's already lost twice, which is just good for him, but, you know. Episode 3, during the Snow Fort Challenge, Scott is able to convince his team, except for Lightning, because Lightning is still hell-bent on wanting Sam out. Scott manages to convince the team that B, who was the most useful member of that team probably, that he was actually sabotaging the challenges. And I mean, Scott even convinces, like, Dawn, for example, which is pretty crazy because Dawn can read auras and stuff like that, but I guess after Scott did some Weedle whispering, after Scott does some Beetle whispering, I think Dawn is a little bit, I don't know, she's just kind of off her game a little bit. She can't, doesn't seem like she can get a read off of Scott during episode 3, or even episode 4, I'd say. Not like Dawn's in episode 4 really that much. But yeah, Scott manages to get rid of B, exactly what you want. And then in episode 5, Scott also, I mean, he basically does this plan perfectly here, where he's trying to frame Brick, since Brick's just swapped teams. Scott is basically just stealing everything from everyone, and is going to blame it on Brick. However, once Dawn catches onto him, and you can tell that Scott suspects this at the end of the challenge when Dawn sort of accuses him of throwing the challenge. Scott is basically then following Dawn to the confessional, gets a confirmation and goes, that's pretty bad, because again, if you get caught sabotaging your team, you're kind of a goner. So Scott kind of switches his plan a little bit. Instead of trying to frame Brick for stealing everything, Scott then frames Dawn, and it works like a goddamn charm, right? You know, Dawn's already a little bit of an outcast, so yeah, goodbye Dawn. Now, the bit that kind of ruins Scott a little bit is at the end of episode 6, where Chris switches Scott and Joe and puts them on different teams. So now Scott is on the mutant maggots and Joe is on the toxic rats. And this is where I think Scott kind of fucks up with his whole plan, because it's kind of a bit of an issue, right? You're trying to make yourself look as bad as possible, but now all of a sudden you're on the super strong team, and I mean, in one way that's good because you can start working on it now, but what Scott does is he still tries to throw the challenges, even though he's on the winning team. It doesn't really make much sense anymore to keep throwing, but I think Scott is just so committed to the plan, he's too rigid, and it backfires because, yeah, Mike catches onto him, Cameron's catching onto him, and, episode 8, Scott would have been gone if it wasn't for the fact that, he has the idol, and just for the record, the idol only helps with Scott's plan. It's basically a get out of jail free card, and you can tell that's, no one else is really looking for it as well, so, Scott's really trying to get this idol, just in case, you never know when you're gonna need it. And then afterwards, the merge, the whole plan's falling apart because everyone kind of knows he was kind of manipulating people, especially once Scott, blackmails Mike with his own personality disorder. That's, pretty fucked up. And I mean, Scott's whole idea of being underestimated at the merge is completely thrown out the window, and is only inevitable until Scott is voted off. And that's where Scott's plan basically falls apart. That team swap and him trying to still throw the challenges even though he's now on a different team. So, what should have Scott done once the team swap happened? I think Scott should have just tried to win the challenges. You know, it's a bit tricky because like Scott can't predict that he's going to swap teams like that. You can't predict that. But you know, once you're on the mutant maggots, you might as well just keep the idea of like the toxic rats did really bad, and I was on the toxic rats, and you know the mutant maggots is the only team that did really good. You know, you still got the sort of a little bit. It's not as good as you'd like. You still got a little bit of that underdog status since you are sort of new to the mutant maggots. You know, you're just put in here. Everyone, you know, is either working together or is fighting against each other. You know, and essentially you just kind of it's not perfect anymore because you've been swapped teams randomly, but you can still manage to, if you can keep the underdog status. You know, if you make people underestimate you. You can still, for the most part, I think, execute the plan pretty well. Because you can say my team did horrible, you know, it's only once I got on the mutant maggots that, you know, I actually started winning challenges, you know. And of course, the one benefit of the swapping the teams is that you can work on the mutant maggots early before the merge even happens, which is what Scott tried to do a little bit with Zoe, right? He gets Zoe's trust, at least temporarily, with showing the idol. And yeah, that is kind of Scott's plan. It's pretty much perfect up until the team swap, and then afterwards, yeah, that Scott basically makes one major mistake of throwing the challenges, even though he's on a different team. Gets kind of caught as well by Mike and Cameron, and then, yeah, kind of can't win now that everyone knows that you're kind of a dick. It's pretty hard. Especially since your team is down in numbers, so you can't even really rely on that either. So it's unsurprising that Scott does get eliminated, but still does quite well, and that's why his plan is almost genius. I mean, Final Four, that's nothing to sneeze at, right? But of course, it's almost perfect and not perfect, because if it was perfect, well, Scott would have won. Like, yeah, he doesn't win, so yeah. Other than that one major fuck-up, I think Scott's plan's actually really solid, and I can see why people maybe think the plan is dumb, because, like, it does sound kind of dumb at first, and also, like, with B's elimination, I find especially, it's a little bit iffy. Like, people believe him, but it's a little bit, like, how do they believe Scott? It's a bit tricky to answer that, and I don't have a super clear answer for that. For episode 5, it's clear, like, oh, people believe Dawn stole everything. Yeah, that makes sense, right? And of course, none of Dawn's items are also, you know, like Scott doesn't steal from Dawn at any point, so even then, I think Scott had a little bit of a backup plan just in case. And so, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.